A young schoolteacher set out on what was supposed to be her first date, just days before Christmas, but she never came home. When she suddenly vanished without a trace, her family reported her missing, and police quickly launched an investigation. But as detectives began uncovering the truth, they stumbled upon something so chilling that even the most experienced investigators struggled to believe it. And when every detail of the case finally came to light, the shocking story made headlines across the entire country. Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Before we get started, make sure to watch this case all the way to the end. As the investigation unfolds, you'll discover shocking details that completely change the way this story looks at first. If you enjoy well-researched true crime stories, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future cases. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think about this case as we go along. Now, let's continue. Katie Locke was born in January 1992 in a suburb of London. She was the youngest of three sisters, with a significant age gap separating her from her older siblings. After graduating from high school, Katie enrolled in university, where she studied history and politics. Once she earned her degree, she began working as a teacher at a Catholic school in London. For Katie, it was the perfect job, although the workload was demanding and the responsibility was immense. She had always dreamed of working with children. Her warm personality made it easy for her to connect with her students, and she quickly earned both their trust and respect. Outside the classroom, Katie volunteered with youth organizations similar to the Girl Scouts, where she mentored young girls and was always willing to support her students whenever they needed her. In what little free time she had, Katie loved spending time outdoors, especially kayaking. She became so passionate about the sport that she earned her instructor's certification and occasionally taught others how to kayak. Katie was also deeply committed to giving back. In 2012, she volunteered during the London Olympic Games, and she even traveled to the United States to help children from underprivileged families. By 2015, at just 23 years old, Katie was still teaching at her school, continuing the work she loved while looking forward to the future she was building. Katie dreamed of having a family of her own, but her demanding career left little time for a personal life. She was looking for a serious relationship and preferred to avoid dating apps whenever possible. Still, with her busy schedule, online dating had become one of the few realistic ways to meet someone. In early December, she met a 26-year-old man named Carl, and the two soon began dating. On paper, Carl seemed like the perfect match. He had graduated from law school, worked for several prestigious law firms, including spending nearly a year on assignment in Moscow, before launching his own legal practice. Beyond his legal career, Carl maintained a personal blog where he wrote about humanitarian issues and shared his poetry. At the same time, he was pursuing additional legal qualifications to further advance his career. Katie and Carl hit it off almost immediately. After several weeks of talking, they decided to meet in person near the end of December. At the time, Katie was still living with her parents. She chose not to tell them she was going on a date, knowing they would worry about her. Instead, she said she was spending the evening with a friend before taking a train into London. The following morning, Katie's parents realized she had never come home. They repeatedly tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Concerned, they contacted the friend Katie had supposedly been spending the evening with, thinking she might have stayed overnight. Instead, her friend revealed the truth. Katie had actually gone on a date and no one had heard from her. Since the previous evening, Katie's friend had been trying to call her since early that morning, but every call went unanswered. Then, at one point, someone finally picked up. It wasn't Katie. Instead, a man was on the other end of the line. He quietly whispered Katie's name, began breathing heavily, and then abruptly hung up. The call terrified her. She immediately told Katie's parents everything that had happened. According to her friend, Katie had arranged to meet Carl in a busy part of London filled with restaurants and bars. When she arrived, Carl wasn't there yet. A short time later, he texted to say he was running late. Katie then messaged her friend, saying that if he didn't show up soon, she was going to head back home. Not long afterward, Carl finally arrived. The two headed to a nearby bar, and sometime later, Katie texted her friend to say that the date was going really well. It was the last message anyone would ever receive from her. Every text sent after that went unanswered. As Katie's parents learned more about the evening, their concern quickly turned into panic. By then, many of Katie's friends had heard she was missing and joined the search. One of the first things they did was track down Carl's social media profile. Katie's parents messaged him directly, asking where their daughter was. Carl replied that Katie had stayed with him until early that morning. According to him, she had left a few hours earlier in a taxi, and he had no idea where she had gone. Still, Katie's family had no leads other than Carl. Determined to find answers, they searched online and found his home address. Katie's father drove there, hoping to speak with him in person. When he arrived, he discovered that Carl still lived with his parents. His mother answered the door and explained that Carl had been out all night and hadn't returned home until after midday. At that moment, however, he was out walking the family dog. After Katie's father explained that his daughter was missing, Carl's mother called her son and asked him to come home immediately. What happened next left everyone in shock. Almost as soon as he answered, Carl calmly told his mother that he had killed Katie. He called himself a monster and begged her not to cry for him. When his stunned mother asked what he meant, Carl admitted that after drinking heavily that night, he had strangled Katie. He told her that he had wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it on a luggage cart at the hotel, and left her among nearby bushes. He then made an even more disturbing confession. Carl said he had planned to tell his parents everything only after Christmas, because he didn't want to ruin the holidays for them. Before ending the call, he told his mother that he was sitting alone on a park bench and even gave her his exact location. Katie's parents immediately contacted the police, though they desperately hoped Carl's confession was some kind of cruel and twisted prank, and that their daughter was still alive. Officers rushed to the park, where they found Carl calmly sitting on a bench, waiting for them. As they arrested him, they noticed multiple scratches on his body, and there were visible bloodstains on his clothing. While officers were placing him in handcuffs, Carl calmly told them exactly where Katie's body could be found. That information was immediately relayed to detectives in London. They rushed to the location and, just as Carl had described, discovered a body wrapped in a blanket on the grounds of a hotel. A post-mortem examination later confirmed that Katie had died from strangulation. Investigators also found numerous injuries on her body consistent with defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought desperately for her life. The evidence suggested that Katie had fought back for a considerable amount of time before she was killed. Investigators also discovered evidence that her body had been sexually assaulted after her death, making the crime even more horrifying. When Carl was taken into custody, investigators collected a blood sample. Toxicology tests later revealed the presence of alcohol, along with a combination of illegal and prescription drugs. Although Carl had already confessed to his mother and directed police to Katie's body, he became almost completely silent during his first formal interrogation. He ignored detectives' questions and refused to explain what had happened that night. But by then, investigators had already begun piecing together their own timeline of events. Carl's mother later told detectives that, during the phone call, he had briefly explained what he claimed had happened. According to Carl, Katie had agreed to engage in consensual intimate activity involving violent role-play. and he insisted that he had accidentally strangled her during the encounter. Investigators found that explanation highly unlikely. First, Katie's body showed numerous bruises, scratches, and other injuries that forensic experts determined had been inflicted while she was still alive, indicating a prolonged struggle. Second, the evidence showed that Carl had sexually assaulted Katie after she had already died, something completely inconsistent with the claim that her death had been a tragic accident. Detectives began carefully reconstructing the events of that night, using CCTV footage, smartphone location data, and witness statements to trace both Katie's and Carl's movements step by step. After meeting near a subway station, Katie and Carl went to a nearby bar, where they spent several hours together. According to bar staff and other witnesses, Carl became heavily intoxicated. At around 1:30 a.m., Katie used her phone to call a taxi. The destination she entered was a hotel located roughly 40 kilometers 25 miles from the bar. Because it was the Christmas holiday season, traffic was especially heavy, and the journey took nearly 2 hours. Katie paid the £65 fare with her bank card. During the ride, Carl became sick and vomited inside the taxi, forcing Katie to pay an additional £80 cleaning fee. Detectives discovered that Carl had booked the hotel room under his own name shortly before meeting Katie. According to a hotel receptionist, Carl was so intoxicated that he could barely stay on his feet. Katie had to help him to the room to keep him from collapsing. A short time later, Katie came back down to the front desk. She asked for 2 toothbrushes and ordered breakfast for 2 to be delivered the following morning. At around 9 o'clock a.m., Carl returned to the reception desk alone and requested a late checkout until 2 o'clock p.m., paying the additional fee with his bank card. After he finally checked out, housekeeping entered the room and immediately noticed that all of the bed linens were missing. They also found that the window lock had been broken. By this point, detectives had assembled a fairly detailed timeline of the night. Even so, one crucial question remained unanswered. What had actually happened inside that hotel room? Detectives then turned their attention to Carl himself. It didn't take long for them to discover that the image he had carefully crafted, a successful lawyer with an impressive career, was nothing more than a fabrication. In reality, Carl had neither a law degree nor the legal career he had claimed to have. But that was only the beginning. Investigators uncovered a long history of encounters with both law enforcement and mental health services. In 2009, Carl had been arrested for assaulting his girlfriend. Over the following years, he was repeatedly admitted to hospitals while experiencing serious mental health crises. By early 2015, Carl was living with another girlfriend and her family, yet he remained under regular psychiatric care. During one conversation with a psychiatric nurse, he admitted that he wanted to kill his girlfriend's sister, remove her clothes, and sexually assault her. The nurse immediately reported the threat to police. After learning that she had done so, Carl began threatening to kill the nurse herself. Not long afterward, Carl called the police himself and said he felt like killing someone. He added that he was standing outside his girlfriend's house. Officers arrested him and ordered a psychiatric evaluation. During the assessment, Carl told doctors that thoughts of killing people sexually excited him. He said he had experienced these urges since his teenage years and that they had grown stronger with each passing year. A month later, he pleaded guilty to threatening to kill his girlfriend's sister and was released on bail. Soon afterward, he was admitted to a psychiatric clinic again. Doctors eventually transferred him to a separate facility for men after staff became concerned that Carl was pursuing sexual relationships with female patients who, because of their mental illnesses, might not have been capable of giving informed consent. While hospitalized, Carl also told staff that he wanted to kill his girlfriend's brother. However, that statement was not treated as a criminal offense. One of the biggest problems investigators later uncovered was that information about Carl's previous cases had not been properly shared between different hospitals and police departments. As a result, many of the professionals dealing with him were unaware that he had already made violent threats against other people. While at the facility, Carl repeatedly warned staff in unmistakable terms, "When I get out of here, when I'm discharged, I'm going to kill someone. Make sure you write that down." He made that statement in the middle of September, just a few months before Katie's murder. Police did open an investigation into the threat, but in the end, they did not classify his statement as a criminal offense. A panel of psychiatrists concluded that Carl's threat may have been the result of the stress he was experiencing while awaiting a hearing about his release from the hospital. Just a few days later, he was discharged and returned to live with his parents. On December 2nd, only a few weeks before Katie's death, Carl received a 9-month suspended sentence for his previous threats against her people. The court also ordered him to remain under psychiatric supervision for 1 year and to complete a 15-day rehabilitation program. Then, in mid-December, less than 2 weeks before Katie was killed, Carl met with mental health professional LS once again. After evaluating him, they concluded that he did not pose a danger to the public. At the same time, neither the doctors nor the police had a complete picture of Carl's behavior during the periods when he had lived in other areas and was being monitored by different agencies. Because that information had never been fully shared, it also influenced their assessment. As a result, Carl remained free, with little meaningful supervision. Detectives soon discovered that he had not wasted that freedom. After gaining access to Carl's online activity, investigators found that he was actively using multiple dating platforms and was communicating with around 20 different women at the time of Katie's murder. They also learned that he had been talking to one particular woman for about 2 months. The day after killing Katie, but before his arrest, Carl called that woman and told her that he had killed someone and would likely be going to prison for a long time. As for the other women, detectives discovered that Carl had gone on dates with many of them. He followed the same routine almost every time. He arranged to meet them at the very same location where he had met Katie, then took them to a nearby bar. Before each date, Carl would find out where the woman lived and book a hotel nearby, believing she would be more likely to agree to go there afterward. He would buy drinks, encourage his dates to drink as much as possible, and become heavily intoxicated himself. If the woman agreed to go to the hotel, they would head there together. Investigators found no evidence that Carl had physically harmed any of the women he met before Katie. Even more disturbing, detectives discovered that he had already arranged another date for Christmas Eve, less than 24 hours after Katie's murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Carl continued to refuse to explain what had happened that night and would not give investigators access to his smartphone. Finally, in March 2016, 3 months after Katie's murder, Carl pleaded guilty to murder in court. Even then, however, he refused to reveal exactly what had happened inside the hotel room. Because investigators couldn't access Carl's smartphone, prosecutors postponed the sentencing. They believed that if he was so determined to keep its contents hidden, the device likely contained crucial evidence. They were right. After months of refusing to cooperate, Carl finally gave investigators the passcode to his phone. Inside the photo gallery, detectives discovered images of Katie's body that Carl had taken after sexually assaulting her. The discovery made an already horrific case even more disturbing. Carl then offered what he described as an explanation, insisting that Katie's death had been an accident. He repeated the same story he had told earlier, that the two had engaged in consensual sexual activity involving violent role-play. According to Carl, Katie had guided his hand to her neck herself, and he had unintentionally strangled her. At the same time, however, He admitted that he had sexually assaulted her after she was already dead, and acknowledged that he had hidden her body afterward. Afterward, Carl calmly ate breakfast and checked out of the hotel. It's worth noting that even his own defense attorney chose not to argue that Katie's death had been an accident. The claim was completely inconsistent with the forensic evidence and virtually impossible to defend. Prosecutors argued that Carl was a violent sexual sadist who had finally acted on the disturbing fantasies he had harbored for years. According to the prosecution, Katie had shown him nothing but kindness. Seeing how intoxicated he was, she paid a substantial taxi fare to get him safely to the hotel. She even covered the additional cleaning fee after he became sick during the ride, and she stayed to look after him because he was clearly in no condition to care for himself. But Carl, under the combined influence of alcohol, illegal drugs, and prescription medication, attacked her. Prosecutors argued that he murdered Katie, then carried out acts of unimaginable brutality against her body. Before sentencing, Carl was evaluated by one of the country's leading forensic psychiatrists. After reviewing the case, the specialist concluded that Carl posed an extreme danger to women and that treatment was unlikely to reduce the risk he presented. In the end, Carl was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of applying for parole until he had served at least 26 years. Before the sentence was handed down, his lawyer read a letter in which Carl apologized to Katie's family for what he had done. Carl himself, however, chose to remain silent, but for Katie's family, the case did not end with the verdict. They believed that responsibility extended beyond Carl alone. In their view, government agencies including England's National Health Service had also failed Katie by missing repeated opportunities to prevent the tragedy. Katie's parents believed that if information about Carl's behavior, psychiatric history, and previous threats had been properly shared between the different hospitals and agencies involved in his care, doctors might have recognized just how dangerous he was and taken steps to keep him away from the public. In response to the case, England's health authorities launched an independent review. The investigators agreed that communication and coordination between the various organizations had been inadequate and needed significant improvement. However, they ultimately concluded that, even if every agency had shared all available information about Carl, it still would not have been enough to reliably predict that he would go on to commit murder. In 2017, Carl received an additional 3-year prison sentence after assaulting a prison officer who had refused to bring him cigarettes and tea. 7 years later, in 2024, the prison officer was awarded £600 in compensation for the attack. Earlier, in 2021, 6 years after Katie's murder, Carl was found lying in a pool of blood on the floor of his prison cell. He was rushed to a hospital, but was pronounced dead soon afterward. The investigation concluded that he had been alone in his cell at the time of the incident. With Carl's death, the criminal case came to an end. However, the broader questions raised by Katie's murder remain unresolved. Although the independent review identified serious failures in communication between medical institutions and other agencies, Katie's family believes that meaningful reforms have still fallen short. To this day, her parents remain convinced that if all of the information about Carl had been properly shared and considered, their daughter's life might have been saved. They continue to hope that the lessons from Katie's case will one day lead to changes that help prevent a similar tragedy from happening again. What do you think about this case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps support the channel. And if you enjoy in-depth true crime stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.